So we have just started recording, and I do want to let you know because after this session is over, I'm going to post it on our website. So you'll be able to share this with anyone who wasn't able to attend or go back and reference if you need anything. Just for logistics, if you can all please keep yourself muted for the presentation. We will have time for questions at the end, but also we'll kind of engage in some conversation during the meeting. I think probably the best way to do that, if you have clarifying questions or technical issues, we're going to use the chat feature. So chat in your questions. I'll be watching that. You can use the raise hand feature as well. And if you've been sitting there for a minute, that's when don't be afraid to put yourself off mute and let us know if you have that question, but I'll be watching you. So following our workshop today, I'm going to send everyone an email. It will have a brief survey, which I would appreciate if you would provide some feedback on our presentation today. And along with that survey link, I'm going to send the link to where this recording will be posted on our website. This workshop is part of the ZAP trainings, networking events, and workshops throughout the year. Our next event is scheduled for Tuesday, October 22nd. It will be 2 to 4 p.m. at the Mid-Valley Performing Arts Center. This is an in-person panel discussion event where we have picked the topic of AI in our arts and culture sector. So we will have a few presenters who will come talk about their work and how AI is a part of their work right now. And then we'll have a discussion with those panelists, as well as leave some time for questions with our audience members. So that should be really fun. I'll be sending out some emails with that, as well as information in our newsletter in the next 2 weeks. So just keep an eye out for that. And without further ado, I will turn the time over to Amberlie Phillips. She is a partner with Pathway Group. And she truly is a phenomenal expert in development and giving. So I'm really pleased to work with her on this workshop, but also through our collaborative program where she's leading some sessions on development and grant writing. So it's been great working with her, and I'm excited to have her present to you today. So Amberlie, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Kelsey. And thank you all for having me. As I was preparing the session and thinking about it over the last week, I was getting really excited and also worried about time. So I have a lot to cover today, and I really did kind of structure this as imagining a lunch and learn. So imagining you all, I mean, probably at your desk, which is slightly depressing, eating your lunch. But as Kelsey said, please use the chat, ask questions, share success stories. But I'm not, for anyone who's heard me speak before, I'm not going to say like, and now we are all going to work together and share. I have a challenge at the end for all of you, but this is, I think, going to be a lot of me talking and sharing ideas and tips while you lunch. So great. So let's dive in. So our time together today, and some of these things are in response to some of the pre-session questions, which I made a little note at the end. So I tried to weave answers throughout the presentation. Remind me if I missed anything, but I did kind of build and adjust my presentation based on those questions. So the first thing we'll cover is year-end giving still a thing? Did a little research, brushed up on a few things that I'll share with you. And then really, I'm going to kind of walk us through when and where should you start as you begin to think about planning your year-end campaign. Totally want to acknowledge some of you are probably already in the thick of this. Some of you may have never done a year-end campaign before. So really, I'm just going to talk through, getting started. What are some tips and things to think about, best practices? Then we're going to spend some time setting goals for the year-end campaign, or talking about setting goals. And, maybe you'll set them as you eat your lunch. And then we'll also spend some time on who are we asking, who is our audience, and also a little bit earlier we'll talk about who is helping us as we move through the year-end campaign. And then this elements to consider is really just sort of my catch-all of like tips and tricks and ideas and things for you to consider as you move through this year-end campaign exercise. So again, as I mentioned, My goal for going through this presentation is to leave all of you feeling inspired, feeling fired up, with some great ideas as you begin to prepare or continue to prepare for your own organization's year-end campaign. And my challenge will be take the next step, like write down at the end of the session, what is the one thing that you will do? So be thinking about that as we go through. And as Kelsey said, please use the chat to ask questions. If you have a great idea you want to share, challenges you've had in the past. I will say, and those of you who were here at the beginning may have heard this, I can't see you. So Kelsey's monitoring the chat. But Kelsey, just feel free to interrupt me, and I'll address that question, and I'll probably do something awkward, like switch off my screen. All right, so let's dive in. So again, some of you may be familiar with the facts about year-end giving, but I did looked at one of my favorite reports, which is the M&R benchmarks report. They do it every year, and it really is very specific to online giving, but they do kind of a broad industry survey, and then they have kind of featured organizations across the country that they do kind of a deep dive into the data. They produce this really funky, cool report every year. I say funky and cool because every year it has a theme. And like one year it was like all of their team members were baking while they went through the highlights of the report. So this is what I have found. So year-end giving is still a thing, and it's actually a big thing for many nonprofits, not all. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So you can see, so December giving accounts for roughly a quarter of annual nonprofit revenue. So this is where approximately a quarter of folks make their donations to nonprofits. So it's a big time of year. And what that means is, in particular, and again, the M&R benchmark report really kind of highlights this, is anywhere between 17% to 34% of your online revenue will be raised in December. Again, this depends on your cause, depends on, how active you are. But on average, 17 to 34% of online revenue comes in that last month of the year. Now, one thing I want to say about this, and I'll just share an example. This is, depending on your cause, depending on your organization. A few years ago, I worked with an organization. I was doing fundraising strategy work, and we were talking about online giving. And I started my career at Ballet West, and I did the food bank. Like, for me, online giving at the end of the year has always been a huge thing. And they were like, they were an educational institution. We just did a really big back to school campaign. We just had, our annual event in October. We feel like our donors are tired. We don't want to make an ask in December. And my point to them was, I think it is totally up to you how much you lean into the year-end messaging in December. You need to decide, and that's really my message today, is you need to decide what will work for your organization. But to not do anything, or to completely take a step back and say our donors are tired, or we're busy, or we have raised all of our money, you're actually missing an opportunity to not only elevate your message, but this is a time when donors are thinking about giving. There are tax reasons which may be shifting, but the fact is that we, as kind of an American society, have been trained to think of December as the time to give. And so to not do anything, you're actually missing an opportunity. It may be a small opportunity, or it may be large, but I strongly encourage anyone and everyone to do something for year. And just because it is such a big piece of giving overall throughout the year. So I did do some searching for arts and culture specific statistics. Couldn't actually find a lot. And one of the questions was actually asking about Salt Lake County specific data for end of year giving. And I couldn't find that anywhere. And I was like, maybe Pathway should do that. But one interesting statistic I did find is that online revenue grew by an average of 3% for arts and culture organizations between 22 and 23. And that was actually the best performing sector in the study. So arts and cultural organizations saw that growth, and they actually had the most. And that was the average, and there was actually a range from 3% to 40%. So there were some positive signs. There were a number of questions about Giving Tuesday, and I have a whole slide about Giving Tuesday, but I will just say, so the statistics right now is Giving Tuesday is a powerhouse, continues to be a giving powerhouse, which accounts for 3% of total online revenue for the year is actually comes in on Giving Tuesday, and that has dropped significantly over the past few years. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So, and then you'll hear me talk about this more as we get into timeline conversations, but December donations made on December 31st, the last day of the year, accounted for 5% of 2023 revenue. So it's a big day. And last year, and actually the year before, there was all sorts of furor in the sector because giving on the last day of the year has actually dropped significantly. So you can see 5%, that's still pretty impressive, but people are like, oh my gosh, like donations on December 31st dropped. Is this an example of the generosity crisis and inflation and people feeling pinched? And I will just say the jury is still out on that. Like I was reading earlier last week, and there were some interesting things that were saying, well, December 31st was a Saturday last year. So people, I think, are really just trying to tease what that means. Those last few days of the year, is it going to continue to drop? Is it going to bounce back when it's a Monday, and maybe more people are staying home? So that'll be interesting to see. But regardless, those last few days of the year are critically important for your annual campaign. And then again, sort of what this all means. You need to do something. My advice is do something that makes sense for your organization. So that's what we're going to talk about. So let's get started. So as you think about starting to plan your year-end campaign, where to start, I always advise that you start at the end. So really, and Pathway, we did a segment over the last few weeks that's on LinkedIn and on our website about planning a year-end campaign. And I did a short segment on taking a deep dive into your data. And really, this is what this slide is all about, is really take a moment, spend some time, an afternoon if you have it, and really consider what do you have from last year. So ideally, what I would say if I'm going to plan my year-end campaign, you would pull together your full campaign timeline from last year that has your appeal drop dates, the donor segments you targeted, response rates by request. So if you did an email on December 1st, you would know how many people responded to that versus the one on December 31st, etc. Average gift amounts, what was the average gift, your return on investments, all of the things. I would love to have a show of hands to see how many people have that. But in my experience, that right there feels like a pretty heavy lift, maybe very scary. So if you've got it, great, pull it together. If you don't, basics, I would say, pull out the total amount raised. You could do November and December, and then look at that by week. If you did some communication, really, look at what happened November 1st, really kind of look at donations by week, gather, any materials, you sent out, or, pull the emails, any board communications, and then really try to create a timeline if you don't have one. So that's sort of the basic beginning, to really consider what you've got to look at. And then if you're, a smaller organization or a newer organization or new to your role, and you're like, well, actually, I don't think we did anything. What did we do? I would say a couple of things. So first, you need to consider what was happening in your organization at the end of last year, and really what the final 3 months of the year look like. What's happening in terms of events, performances, engagement with the public. So what's happening externally, and then also what's happening internally. Like, what do you guys have going on? Like, is there time off? And then really consider what resources you have to offer. Now, I'm going to take this moment right now to address one of the questions that I actually saw a few times on the pre-question seminar, which is database. Can you recommend, a low cost, easy to use CRM? Would love, folks, if you have a donor database in that you love, to drop it in the chat so we can all see. I think I tend to be one of those folks. It's like, actually, almost any donor database will work. It's sort of like, to me, it's more interesting, like the quality of the information and the consistency. That is what is, I think, going to determine how well your donor database functions. But two that we often recommend at Pathway are Bloomerang and Little Green Light. And I say both of those would allow you to do some of that donor segmentation, would allow you to run reports, put gift entry in. So, but again, like I'm not paid by either of those organizations. They're both just low cost systems I've used and other members of the team have. So happy to chat more about that. So you've got your data, or you've got what data you can gather. And then I'd like you to take up from last year, from 2023. And then I would encourage you to take a look at what you have done so far this year. And I'm not talking about as an organization, all the great things you have done, but really consider your fundraising year to date. How many times have you asked folks? And I always say, for me, I have a quarterly rule of thumb when I'm putting together annual fundraising plan, is I want to look at every quarter and say there has been an opportunity for donors and prospects and the community to engage in my cause. So have you done that? What has that looked like? What messages have you done? If you haven't done it, has it been a year since you've asked anyone? What does that look like? And then, not only how many times have you asked folks, but how well have you communicated with your donors, both your major donors? How often have you had that sort of communication, those touch points, those opportunities to engage with them, as well as sort of the broader public? Like, how often are you communicating, telling your story? And this is oftentimes, where I'm working with organizations, or honestly, organizations that I have been in charge of, where you start doing this analysis and you're like, oh man, it's like been a year since I've talked to that donor. The last time I talked to them was when I sent them the chip, sent them the thank you for their $1,500. Now I really need their $1,500 again. That's a terrible feeling. So hopefully you're doing this now before, the $1,500 gift is due. So really think about that. And then also think about, how well do you feel like your donors have been stewarded? Are your thank yous, have you been on top of them? Have there been other opportunities for you to express gratitude throughout the year? So you have all of those things, you take a step back, and then you dive in to looking ahead and creating your plan. So there's actually a lot of things on this slide, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time in going into great detail, but I would say, when I say create a plan, I actually, encourage you to use a tool that works for you. When I'm creating an annual fundraising plan, I actually start by just creating a narrative document. And what I do in those documents is these things: is identify your team. Who do I have who can help me? Who are helpers, potential helpers that I may recruit? So other members of the staff, not just development staff. So your executive director, maybe some program staff, anyone who may be able to help you. Consider the board. Is there an opportunity for them to be engaged in the plan? And then other volunteers. So who's on my team? And then consider the cost. Like, what is my budget? Do I have a budget? Like, how much might I be able to spend on this plan? Again, ideally, it's written down in your annual fundraising budget. You've got $5,000 for your year-end campaign. But if not, really start to think about, well, what would I like to do? How might it cost? How much might it cost? And then, once you sort of have those things, determine your story, your message, your theme. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I highly advise, for year-end campaigns, you really reflect on, what is the story I want to tell. Focus on impact, focus on inspiration, and focus on creating a sense of urgency to give, but really determine that at the outset and really bounce it off other members of your team. Who are you going to ask? Really start to think through who are the people, how am I going to ask them, what are the tools I'm going to use. Determine your elements. Is this going to be all email, written communication? Are you going to put video in? Is there in-person opportunities? Just determine the elements of the plan. And then most importantly, perhaps, is determine the cadence. So how often, as you move through this campaign, how often will you be asking folks? How often will you be engaging them? Determine the purpose of each activity. And actually, I'll show you a little bit later, I have a sample timeline. And then that last piece that I think is, I have it in green because I think it's one of those things that people often forget as they're creating the plan, is you need to have a plan to track and document. So in the prior slide, if I was like, these are the ideal things, and you're like, well, I have none of those things. It would be great if I did. As you create your plan, that is the time to sit down and say, this is how I'm going to track and document things. And, the ideal way is to set up campaigns, appeals in your database. How does your web form, your donate form, just if it feeds into your database, can you set up the campaign so in December, this is for this particular appeal. But again, really start to think through how you will track and document your plan so if it's successful. You're like, oh, I want to try this year. And then next year it'll be like, I don't know, it feels like it was successful. I have no idea. But you're going to want to put that in your plan. So elements of your plan, I encourage you to sort of look through. So this is a list of ways to give. And I would encourage you to think carefully about every single one of these and explore if it's the right way to give for your organization. You want to offer it. Do you want to offer it or not? And then really maybe push yourself. Maybe pick one, like, we haven't tried this before, or, this one seems like it might be a low-hanging fruit. I'd like to try it. So I'm going to talk more about direct mail in a moment, but just a few highlights. So you can see I have your website. So hopefully you all have a donate now button on your website as you're planning your year-end campaign. This is a perfect time. If you haven't done it recently, take a look at your giving page. How do you feel about it? Is it up to date? Is it accurate? Does it have all of the different ways to give to your organization? So not only online giving, does it mention something about, stock gifts or giving through your donor advised fund? Does it say anything about making a gift in honor or memory? Like, really taking the time to make sure that's up to date is critically important because, again, December is the time where we are trained to give. So odds are good that that giving page is going to get more traffic, even if you don't do anything. That page will get more traffic during the months of November and December. So really make sure that, things are in order. And then, really think about what's your budget? What are you going to do for social media? Is there an opportunity, for paid content, whether online or, in other formats? And then, those last few things is think about current relationships you have and how you may be able to incorporate personal outreach or partnerships as a way to drive giving. So really, as you build your plan, think about all of the different ways there are to give to your organization and try to, incorporate most, if not all of them into your program. So a couple of things about direct mail. So I have a pretty strong direct mail background just through some of my work. So I was like, yes, direct mail is a thing. And, I did a little bit of research to assure myself that it is still a thing. And really, the rule of thumb is, yes, direct mail is still a thing. And really, the key is to use it as part of a multi-channel strategy that supports and expands upon everything else you're doing. So a good way to think of this is, your end of year campaign has a theme. You're going to send a mail piece that actually, feels and looks the same in terms of look that for what you're using on your social media or email or, on television, but it's a different story. It's a different look. So it works. And actually interesting, the second piece, I found this statistic. So for every dollar raised online, arts and culture organization raised $1.25 through direct mail in 2023. So, and that was not the highest performing sector, but it was one of the
No,
highest. Actually, that I found that to be a really interesting statistic, and I could speculate on why that is in terms of age of people. Some of it honestly might be that you guys have really pretty, lovely things that donors respond to. I mean, there are many reasons, but that is just what the research is showing. So letter versus postcard. I will tell you, I have a bias. I do not care for postcards as fundraising devices. They do work to a certain extent. Again, if they're part of a multi-channel strategy, you can remind folks that the postcard is in the mail to watch for it, but a letter will perform more. It will perform better. Just as a general rule of thumb, letters, multiple page letters, beautifully designed letters perform better than postcards. The more personal, the better. And, there was a question about reply devices and, using different types of paper and return envelopes and various things. I will just say it depends on your organization. I would highly encourage testing. And to me, the two most important things are making sure that it fits your organization and your mission. And there must be a reply device that is easy for organizations. Don't just say, we're going to send a letter, but we don't want to spring for an envelope, so we'll put a QR code. I'm sorry, like many people, like if people are looking for an envelope and they don't find it, they are probably not the audience that's going to engage with a QR code. So I would say if you're doing a letter, absolutely, you need to have a reply device. And that probably right there, that statement explains some of my bias against a postcard because there is no reply device other than a website or a QR code. So direct mail, don't discount it. And I think you just have to consider it in light of your overall campaign. So you've got your plan, you've written down what you want to do. Next step, create your timeline. So start today if you haven't already. And I was like, okay, you can start October 1st. I'll give you a few days, but at least you're thinking about it today. And I would encourage you to really think about October for awareness building and impact. So what if, when I asked, what have you done year to date? How well have you stayed in contact with your donors? If you had some concerns, we have October, before we sort of dive in and roll up our sleeves into year-end asking. So let's think through what can we do to, connect with donors, to raise awareness, to talk about our impact before we move to kind of start to get people's attention before we move into the everyone give all the time. And then as you create your timeline, again, I encourage you to take a step back and really consider what else is happening in your organization. And I think, for arts organizations and culture organizations, think about what other revenue generating activities are happening during those months, how critical they are to the budget. Is there an opportunity to partner? Is it, do you need to step back? And, and I wrote that in my, thinking of, my arts experience where I started my career at Ballet West. Obviously, we had the Nutcracker in December. That was an opportunity, critically important to the company as far as a revenue driver. And so really thinking of your end of year campaign in that light, how do things fit for me? And that, to that end, think about other communications. Like, is your audience being bombarded with opportunities to buy Nutcracker tickets? And then how, as far as, resource development or a fundraising message, how and where does that fit in? And then I always also encourage people to think of time off. Like, what are you planning to do personally in November and December? Is the office closed? And then, really building that into your campaign. Like, well, actually, we're closed, the last week of the year, or I'm, going out of town. So I'll need to get all of this ready to, I'll need to get all of this ready to go before I head out. So, building that into your timeline, because otherwise you'll be like, oh yeah, well, I'm actually gone. So, and the last piece of your timeline is don't stop in December. Like, once you hit January, really think about plotting out in your timeline, how can I use January? I always tell folks that, January should be your month of gratitude. You've just been, going full speed ahead with fundraising year end. And then it's like, oh, now we're just going to go dark. No, I don't think you should go dark. I think you should celebrate, be grateful, and internally do that analysis, write it down, track it. So next year, when you start to think about year end, you just pull it and you're like, look, I have all of these great statistics and analysis. Do all of that work while it's still fresh. So this is just a sample timeline. You can see nothing fancy, like nothing too exciting here. This is actually someone, and this is a client shared this with me back in 2023. I think it's not an arts organization, but you can see, so there's the deliverable. They actually, as part of their strategy, they use different members of their community as the leaders. So, they may have their board chair or their CEO or their CDO, kind of crafting messages, or the messages were signed by them. So that's that second column. And then, they sort of have their content notes, the format, and then, they started putting in their deadlines. So I would say the one thing, and it kind of got cut off, is that final column. As you create your timeline, really start to think about, who is this going to? We'll talk a little bit more about segmentation in a minute, but obviously, social posts, you kind of put, these are all of the channels, but if you're doing an email or a letter, really start to say, who is my target audience? How many is that going to take? So again, simple sample timeline for the actions and appeals that we are taking. So you can see on this one, they had, I think, 3 posts. They have 3 actions around Giving Tuesday. And so my advice, you heard at the beginning that Giving Tuesday is declining. And so my advice is always to use Giving Tuesday as a tool, but not the tool. And what I mean is, and giving days, I've participated them. Obviously, Park City has Live Give. For a number of years, we had Love Utah, Give Utah. Giving days are a psychological driver. They create urgency. They create, opportunity. They're a reason for you to communicate with supporters. And I think in particular with Giving Tuesday, increasingly people are like, is it really worth it? And I've heard this from organizations across Salt Lake, Utah. They're like, yeah, like we do it. We don't get a ton of money. Is it really worth it? So I would say at minimum, you should make a post. Like Giving Tuesday is primarily a social campaign. Like it is not where I would spend, any dollars specifically. Like I would say at minimum, make a post, acknowledge it, say, hey, support us. It's Giving Tuesday, the biggest day of giving of the year. As you consider your gifts, please, consider my organization. And I say that with a grain of salt, because if you've had great success with Giving Tuesday and you want to continue it, please do so. It may work really well for you. Now, the one sort of caveat or nuance to that is if you're an organization and you're like, well, we really haven't done a lot for the end of year campaign. We've kind of done things here and there and we've stopped. Nothing seems to be really successful. Again, Giving Tuesday as that psychological driver can be a great way to start or engage folks in a different way if you've never done it before, or, if you've kind of fallen down. So you may think of something that's not like, we are going to put a post out, we're going to send an email to the world and expect thousands of dollars. But you could put together a campaign where it's like, our first step is going to be engage our board members. We're going to start in October by saying, we've never done this before. Giving Tuesday is an incredibly important, it's the biggest giving day of the year. We're going to ask you to take action on Giving Tuesday, and really engaging them in that discussion and opportunity to give on a more personal way. I would say the same holds true for volunteers or parents or, other members of your community, to really, maybe engage them in that more personal way. So it's not, again, just like a blast, we're going to do this, but say, we've got this day, it's big nationwide, it's big worldwide, we are going to participate in that. And I would say, if you choose to embark upon that strategy, really manage your expectations. So perhaps set a goal that feels very attainable and that you can attain, because you want to allow folks to celebrate and feel successful. So you begin to build momentum. Like, nothing's worse than a Giving Tuesday campaign that's like, we're going to raise $10,000. And then at the end, you're like, oh, we raised 659. And then it's never heard from again, right? Because you're like, I'm not telling anyone. Like, I hope they just forget. So again, think about what you can do, be really realistic, manage expectations, and then celebrate, use it as a launching pad. And when Giving Tuesday first came about, I think the first year I had my whole year-end campaign planned, and I was like, seriously, another day? Like, how am I going to fit this in? This is kind of a huge pain. And so what I did for my organization at the time is I actually kind of flipped it and said, well, we want folks to give, but rather than give money on Giving Tuesday, we're asking folks to give time. And so we put together a volunteer project and asked folks, to engage that way. And over the years, that turned out to be a really powerful way for our organization to engage in Giving Tuesday that didn't conflict with my beautiful, perfect year-end campaign. But it was just like, this is a really nice and lovely touch point. And honestly, that first year, I was like, I actually don't care if no one comes to this volunteer project. But we were able to get good support. So, okay, so you've got your timeline, you've got your plan. Now, just a few words about setting your goal. So you always want to start with, how much did you raise last year? Then, say like, what's my goal? But then also think about how much is budgeted. When I say budgeted, ideally you would have your year, your campaign budget from your development plan. You can be like, yep, year end, I know I want to raise $170,000. In my experience, a lot of organizations, their development plans are not that detailed. So maybe something to work towards. But at minimum, take a step, look at your overall fundraising goal for the year, and then your path to the goal. Does your year end on December 31st? Are you mid-year? And, how are you going to get there? And then use those things to really say, for year end, last year we raised 50,000. We really, we're running ahead or we're running behind. So we want to raise 55 or 45, but just be really realistic. And then, aside from those monetary goals, really think about other goals that you should set sort of based on the campaign plan that you've put together. Are you trying to acquire new donors? Are you trying to engage folks or educate folks in a different way? Is this an opportunity for you to get some media exposure and just raise awareness about the need, for community support that your organization has? And then, again, sort of in light of the Giving Tuesday slide, what, is there a goal that you want to set around board engagement or board giving or volunteer engagement? So again, think through, what are those non-monetary goals for your campaign that would actually make you feel really good to exceed them or to hit them. And then I always say, like, once you've done that, you've set the goal, you've got the plan, you've got the timeline, take a deep breath and say, can I really do this? Like, it's October 1st, Amberlie, you've given me tons of things to do. Is this plan attainable? And if you have concerns, maybe again, look at your, who is on your team. Is there anyone that you need to tap into as far as getting help? Or do you need to scale back? Maybe make it more realistic. So, really doing that gut check now is really good, rather than, December 15th. And you're like, oh, actually, I totally forgot about this government grant that's due that I'm also writing, really thinking through that. So, I've talked a little bit about segmenting. And I think a big factor in planning any year-end campaign is, who should I ask? And my answer is everyone, of course, kind of, maybe, well, it depends, really. So my advice is, as you think about your campaign plan and the actions you're taking, I would say segmenting which is, not sending the same ask to everyone, like the exact same ask, like everyone gets this. Our top donor, our lowest donor. Segmenting is critical. And I totally acknowledge that there are challenges and limitations, resources, data. So really think about what is realistic for you to achieve and where is the biggest risk if you don't segment. And when I say biggest risk, I'm actually talking primarily about that second line, which is grantors. So, if you just received a very large grant from a private foundation, you're going to want to make sure that you segment them out of your annual, your end of year holiday appeal. I would strongly urge you to actually plan a touch as part of your plan. Plan some sort of touch, a message of gratitude, a holiday card, something, that lets them know you're here, you're thinking of, because you actually never know. They may have, they may be making end of year grants, but really, be mindful about folks who should really not be getting those mass appeals. And I always advise, in my experience, people tend to, it's almost like there are two schools of thought. They're either like going to send to everyone no matter what, or when it comes to segmenting, they're actually too timid and there's too much segmenting and people go far too much in the weeds and they're actually not bold enough in their end of year giving. And a specific example of that is over the course of my career, I have, engaged with a number of organizations and have worked for a few that have had their big signature event. I mentioned the educational organization in the fall. So October, November, well, September, October, November. And I always have people who say, well, they just attended our event and gave us, $250. And, now it's December. I don't want to ask them again. So take them off the list. I would highly advise you to not deploy that strategy. Like those are exactly the folks who, if they made a gift in September, you've thanked them appropriately, you've, been active in your communications. Again, individuals, we are trained to think of December as year-end giving. So make another ask. Make another ask as part of your overall campaign. Another segmentation that I often hear people say, and I highly encourage you not to segment them out, is board members and past board members. It's like, well, giving annually is a part, of the board agreement. It's an expectation of board members. They do so much. I don't want them to get our annual appeal. That makes me uncomfortable, or holiday appeal, excuse me. And I would say, again, they are absolutely the ones who should be receiving the year-end appeal. And I would actually go a step further and do some education with them about, we're doing, we have a very active year-end campaign planned. You'll all be receiving the mailer. We hope you can respond if you are able. And who should we be adding to our list? Like, really don't be afraid to engage those closest to you in the asking and the end of year campaign. So again, sort of getting off the segmenting soapbox for a minute. So I always say, start with your major donors and then, maybe go one-on-one or, from segments, what is the best approach? And again, the larger the gift level, I encourage you, the more personal, the better. So, I said maybe a personal letter from the executive director or a board member. If you're going to ask them for money, ask them for money, but make it as personal as possible. And then consider your lapsed donor strategy. And I always, organizations very often struggle with, well, they've been lapsed for 10 years. I don't know that we've really asked them after the year. Should I ask them again? And I would just say, there is no rule of thumb. It varies. And I think with COVID in particular, things got a little wacky for a few years there. And so we're kind of out of that window, but we're still in it a little bit. And I would just encourage you this year, if you choose to engage your lapsed donors, to kind of draw a line in the sand and say, okay, this year we're going to engage lapsed donors from 3 years ago and see what our response rate is and document it, track it, and then say, okay, that was effective or that wasn't effective. And, really say, really look at the ROI and kind of start to document and decide what will you do in the future. Because again, if donors are going to give and they've become lapsed, end of year is probably a pretty good time to engage them. And then again, in addition to sort of looking who is currently in your universe, really consider what is your acquisition strategy? How are you going to use the end of year campaign to get new donors? I always encourage folks to look at volunteers because they are 66% more likely to donate. And the caveat is only if your volunteers are having a great experience and feeling engaged and feeling appreciated. So consider volunteers as part of your acquisition strategy. And then, think about others. So, for you, it may be folks who purchase tickets, parents, workshop attendees, general public who may be attending an event. How can you incorporate that acquisition strategy as part of your end of year campaign? And I would say just a word of advice or something to think about. I very often get asked by organizations who are planning a year-end campaign, should we rent a list? And my advice is generally probably not, unless there is a compelling reason to think that the list is very specific, like will be very responsive to your organization's specific work. In my experience, it very rarely is worth it. So there tend to be better ways to acquire donors, through efforts that are a little bit more grassroots, a little bit more community based than renting a list of 50,000 names and getting 3 donations. So, and again, I gave a gift to a national organization last year who rented my name, and the sheer amount of mail I got was overwhelming. Like it was actually, I was almost offended. And I'm a fundraiser and I read them all. But I was like, okay. So I wanted to share this slide. So this is actually from a UK organization, Arts Philanthropy. I've got the stat in there, but I wanted to share it because I started thinking as I prepared this presentation about communicating the message and the ask. And something that I think I said in my ZAP collaborative session a couple of weeks ago, and something that I think about a lot, is that arts donors have different motivation. And they engage with their arts and culture organizations differently than maybe a human service or an environmental organization. They have different motivations. And so again, I found this chart and I thought it was really interesting to think about how and why donors engage in the arts. And what this organization has found is that donors engage because of their own personal enjoyment. They want to invest in the future of the art form. They want to help others become engaged in the arts. So reaching new participants. So they want, audience to be developed. They want basically to share something that they love with the community so your organization can thrive. And then there is that element of that wider societal benefit, right? Like the broader impact of the arts. So this as a, donor motivation is again, very different from, animals or human services. And as you think about your campaign plan and your messaging, it is directly related to the story that you want to tell. So you need to think about your story in light of why the donors will care. So how will this motivate them? Because you may have done amazing things, but the question you need to ask yourself is, why should they care? And again, think about that donor motivation circle I just showed and why donors, most likely engage in your organization. And this, I totally acknowledge, I know there are probably some organizations on this call that, maybe have other donor motivations, but think through that in terms of, well, this is my story. This is my theme. How will it motivate my donors through this lens? And then really, what is my call to action? I always say, really celebrating your success and talking about all the great things you did last year, that has a part of a campaign, but it actually doesn't inspire action moving forward, right? Like you want to tell the story of, this is what the future looks like and we need your help. You want to allow the donor to see themselves as a critical piece of the future success, one where they will get personal satisfaction, they will help ensure the future of something they love, et cetera, et cetera. But really think through those stories and again, the things that you want to tell in light of the donor motivation. And then, in addition to, thinking about how you're going to motivate donors, really consider gratitude as part of your strategy. So a few kind of key tips is now is the time to refresh your thank yous. And one, again, like this is related to the website, but just a question, when was the last time you looked at your donation page confirmation? Like, is that up to date? Is it timely? Is it really maximized for messaging? And, from that, I always say, I make a donation online, I don't know, $250. I get the automated thank you. And then if I never hear from the organization again, there's a reason donor retention rates are so low. So really thinking through what happens in the donor journey after they make their gift, get that automated thank you. What bandwidth do I have to implement a stewardship series? Is there another touch point? If someone gives on December 1st, hopefully I will segment them out so they won't, get blasted with emails for the rest of the year, for the rest of the calendar year. But I don't want to just go dark on them while I'm celebrating and telling my story. So how can I implement some simple stewardship steps? Totally want to acknowledge that may seem like a heavy lift, but it could actually, over time, maybe it's an aspirational goal, make it personal. This is also a great opportunity to use board members who are maybe like fundraising, not really my thing. What about gratitude? Would you be willing to help with that as far as signing thank yous or taking the lead on thank you calls, et cetera, et cetera? And one tip that I would highly encourage you to think of as part of your campaign plan and using January for gratitude is I do think that it is best practice for organizations to send out giving statements by email, snail mail if needed, that really detail any gifts the donor has given to your organization over the course of the last calendar year. It's a great stewardship tool. It's actually a great customer service tool because as donors begin to gather their tax paperwork and like, oh, I'm trying to find that email, that they sent me 6 months ago, to just say, thank you so much for your support. We, as a courtesy, we've prepared this giving statement detailing it. It's a great stewardship tool. So I highly encourage you. And again, most CRMs can do that with a click of a button. So make that part of your plan. And then, this is just a few kind of tips for success or ideas to consider as we come to the end. So don't neglect the message. I already kind of talked about it and thinking of the donor motivation, but I mean, you're the arts and culture. Like you can be creative and have fun. And every time I get the give now before year end, I'm like, really? Is that the best we can do? Like, surely we can come up with a better, more inspiring message that is urgent and will inspire folks to ask. Really, I haven't talked about this, but I would highly encourage you to consider how a matching donation might be a part of your campaign. So big fan of matches, Philanthropy Works found that matching opportunities increases the likelihood that someone will make a gift by 22%. So practical tips, since we are headed into October, the best matching strategy is a new donor that will give you a match for a significant amount. So 50,000, 100,000, or a group of donors. That would be the best. I acknowledge we're in, almost to October. You may not have the opportunity or the time to cultivate, identify, and ask a brand new donor. Second best would be an upgraded donor or group of donors. So look at who gave to you last year in November and December. Maybe take your top 5 gifts and say, these folks, I know them, they like us. Is there an opportunity to say, we're going to launch a matching campaign? Would you consider increasing your gift and being part of a circle of donors? And then the third, not my preferred strategy, but it may be something. Is there a recent gift you have already received that you could reach out and say, thank you so much for your gift. we're planning, our end of year campaign. Would you consider letting us use that as a challenge grant for the year end? So again, this is something that, hopefully next year, if you've never deployed a matching strategy, you can say, I'm going to start working on this in May. But I would highly encourage you to think it could be a match that goes throughout your campaign, could be, 1 week, could be Giving Tuesday if you're going to lean in hard. And then I think this is an opportunity for arts and culture organizations, is I think you can consider acquisition strategies that do have a more transactional element. So, here I've got a roundup campaign, if someone's buying tickets, they can round up. You could offer an incentive. And I said, not a lame one. When I say incentives, I'm not talking about, I feel bad if any of you use those address labels. So it's not lame, but I was really thinking about something that resonates with your mission. Maybe it's a ticket, maybe it's a special opportunity to engage with the artist, et cetera, but really think about, what is a way that I could drive new donors? What is something I have or I create that they may want? And how can I leverage that for donations? So, all right, so we only have a couple of minutes, but again, sort of leaving you with my challenge is really take a moment, write down what is the one thing that you can do or will do before the end of the month to set yourself up for success as you move through the year end. So, and with that, I will take the last few minutes. I will use questions. So sorry, Kelsey, I didn't have as much time as I thought. So.
Oh, no, you're great. I think, yeah, we ran right up to that tippy top of the moment, but I'm happy to be here for a few additional minutes too, if anyone else wants to hang on for some questions. And just before I do open it up, I do want to say thank you so much to Amberlie for being here and leading this great workshop. I hope that you were all able to get a little inspiration or just a little nugget of something that gets you ready to kick off an end of year giving, campaign, whatever that looks like for you this year. And just with that, if you need to jump off, go right ahead. But otherwise, if you have questions, we will stay here. You can just put yourself off mute and ask away.
Yep, I'm totally happy. I was planning on 7 minutes, but 7 minutes for questions. We have 1 minute for questions. Just kidding. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, Rachel.
So my question would be, you said that one of the phrases to avoid is give now before year end. What have been ones that link to a year end campaign that have grabbed your attention, whether by email or letter?
I think I was more being tongue in cheek, surely we can do better. And, I sort of said that, knowing that, if you send an email out on December 30th, you kind of want to be the year is ending, give now. I totally acknowledge that. But my point would be, and I'm trying to think of some, is how can you differentiate yourself from the pack of everyone is sending out give now before year end, but maybe explain why December is a critical time to give for your organization, or, thinking through your story. What will January bring for you? Why do you need this money today? How can you inspire action in a way? And I will say, every year, many people, their fiscal year ends on June 30th. And every year I get emails that are our fiscal year ends on June 30th, please give. And I'm that is not a reason to give. So what is the reason to give, right? So that sort of, and if I can come up with a great example, I'll share with you. But now that I've said it, you're going to notice it everywhere. So you'll notice the ones that are good.
Although I do think that Rachel and Story at Crossroads will be some of our most creative minds to put to that, being the story artists that they are. So,
well, and I would say have fun with that, Rachel, right? What can you do to engage your community in, creating urgency or writing something new, or, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to have fun with year-end campaigns, and people often don't because they're too over, it's resources.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Yeah, Sandy. Oh, wait, you got to unmute first. Sorry.
Oh, still can't hear you, Sandy.
Sorry, this
There
is
you
a whole different way to navigate for me, and I've missed. I can hear you, but I couldn't always see. I wondered if you had any other great ideas. I love the volunteering time rather than money. Has anything else come to mind, like how can you volunteer the time, or what other non-monetary volunteerism to donate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very specific to the organization, and I think a lot of it relates to your goals, and sort of like thinking about engagement, right? So, if you're asking for volunteering time, what, might those projects be or opportunities to volunteer be? But there may also be a way to create something for like an arts and culture organization, or to spread the word, like, or I don't know, I'm totally making this up, like share something like related to, if you're a writing organization, like maybe that the ask is, we're trying, share your favorite author, like really like, asking people to give advice or ideas or thoughts. Like that could be something that's very successful as part of engagement. And one thing that I didn't actually mention, but is another way, is to think, I mean, holidays, the season of giving. So is there an opportunity to sort of link your ask to giving a gift? Like, I always think of like neighbor gifts or family gifts. Like no one needs more stuff. So is there a way to say, you care about us, make a gift in honor or memory of someone, and, we'll send them a thank you, or we'll do this. And I would say the only caution I have with that is just, if you're going to do something like that, make sure you can deliver, right? Because no one wants to say, oh, I made a gift in your honor, and you're going to get a letter, and then, the person who you made the gift in honor of never gets anything, right? Like, so, but I think that can be another effective way to sort of say, rather than doing neighbor gifts, like give the $500 to us, and we'll tell them thank you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, Amberlie, I think that's just such a great way to think about, be creative, right? It doesn't have to be just a financial give. It could be something a little bit different too.
Yeah. And if you need stuff, it's easy to get stuff, like super easy to get stuff from people.
I have maybe a point, not a question.
Sure.
With regard to volunteers, you have to have a whole separate planning process. It's a whole separate thing. And maybe you can tie that into other things like Giving Tuesday and, of course, fundraising planning. It's got to be separate. The other thing, the same thing goes with grantors. What motivates them is completely different, and it's the process. The thank you process, the development process is completely different, and shouldn't be mixed up. Decades ago, I read a great book called Strategic Marketing for Not-Profit Organizations by Armand Laffer, and he made the point that all organizations have three publics: the input public, which gives you resources, the throughput public that does the work, and the output public to which your work is focused on.
Right.
And I always think about that when people mention narratives and stories, because too often the throughput public focus on themselves.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I love that point. I totally agree, because I agree. I feel, and it's very easy to do. I understand why. And I think very often the throughput public we get lost in the message. And it's like, well, actually, like, why do people care? So yes, thanks for your comment. I appreciate it. Oh, look,
Yeah, and
Rachel
so, yeah, thank you for
brainstorming
that,
in the
Rachel.
chat.
I knew we would get something. Right, so I would just like to, I'll close out here for us that thank you again for being with us today. In my follow-up email, I will also include Amberlie's contact information if we didn't have a chance to ask a question or it came up a little bit later. And so just look for that email. And yeah, thank you all again. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you all. Thanks for having